Do you feel a shiver up your spine from fear? Yes, it's another story from the Nightshade diary. You know what that means. Check under the bed and make sure no one or nothing is there. Is the closet door securely shut? Then leave your disbelief behind. Amp up your imagination and hang on tight for another ride into terror and mystery. And like all good horror stories, just imagine it's a dark and stormy night. And remember, screaming like a little girl is permitted. Gibbler's Ghost by William F. Nolan. Plippity plop, a girl a night. Rainbow chicks, blonde on Monday, brunette on Tuesday, redhead on Wednesday, falling like soft ripe plum into Des Cahill's bed. Des shook the tree, and down they came. Plippity plop. Ole Des, the make-out king. Cahill the cool, Mr. Codpiece. Remember how it was? Every young stud in the country envied him. Walk like Des in his Gucci buckle clips, wore his hair with the same cruel curl over one eye. Thumb crushed his cigs after 3 quick puffs, the same savage way Des did. Sure, who could forget? But now he's gone. No more movies or TV specials or Broadway guest shots in the nude. Women, and a lot of men, paid scalpers up to $100 to get a front row peek at Cahill's equipment, and they were never disappointed. So what happened? How come at the top of the ladder he walks, does the big fade, and is seen no more? I can tell you. I figure his public deserves to have the real rap laid down on Des Cahill. I was his best friend, if he ever had one. My name is Albert. I took care of his income tax problems and lent him my shoulder for crying on. And believe me, Des had plenty to cry about. It begins with a ghost. Des liked to swing high. His pad was in Benedict Canyon. Rafters, crackling fire, mild deep rugs, a bear's head on the wall. Cozy. I was working in the back of the house late one night on a capital gains tax dodge for Des, my first time over to his place, when I hear this agonized female shriek of fear from the master bedroom. As I rush toward the room, out the door comes this pneumatic blonde, wearing midnight hush eye makeup and a really terrified expression. She snake shakes into her clothes, looking great doing it, and does a quick exit. Then she misses 3 gears on her MG going down the hill. Des is standing by the bed, wearing a rumpled pair of tiger's eye shorts and looking bereft. That's the only word for how he looked, bereft. It was him again, he says softly. Who's him? The friggin' ghost! Who the hell else would I have in there? Right away, I take his word. Then you've seen this spook before? And my question, Des chuckles. He laughs. He throws back his head and howls. He falls down on the rug, breaking up, then he stops and looks at me. Albert, he says, I'm going to tell you something I have never told anybody else in this living world. I'm 25, loaded with bread, up to my ass in fame, with maybe 10,000 cuddly little numbers, ready to make the sex scene anytime I lift a pinky. And you know what? What? Albert, I'm a virgin. We have a drink, 2 drinks. We're on our 3rd vodka martinis with hair on their chests when Des lays it out for me. First time I tried to make it all the way with a chick, I was 15. And that's when I saw him. The ghost, in broad daylight, at the beach on a Saturday afternoon. An old geezer dressed in full armor, looming right above us with this horse over his head. I stop Des there and he tells me that whenever the ghost appears, he is always holding up a horse, holding it in the air. Like he's about to throw it at you, says Des. Anyhow, the chick fainted and I was very disturbed. It happened again the following Friday with me and the mayor's daughter. And that's the way it's been ever since. I got a chick into the hay and we are at the absolute moment of truth, you know? I know. And that's when the ghost comes on with a horse. Naturally, it scares the shit out of my date. Naturally. No matter where I am, it happens. On location down in Pennsylvania last summer for the coal mine flick, I had every precious young available female in town panting at my motel door. So I took 'em on one per night and always got up to the grand moment, you know. I know. When out he pops with his goddamn overhead horse and the scene is blown. 36 days on location. 36 chicks, 36 blow-ups. He knuckles his eyes, rolls his head. Albert, I cannot go on. I've got the hottest sex rep in showbiz, and I haven't made it once. He sobs, a broken, terrible sound. Not once. That's when I give him my shoulder to cry on. Later, I give him advice. Hire a class ghostbreaker who knows his spooks and go after the bastard with a horse. This he does. The ghostbreaker is a nervous, kinky little guy, but he guarantees his work. They will be no longer a ghost when he is through. This we can bank on. He goes the full route, with powders that flash and explode, with chalk circles around the bed and invocations and curses and a lot of arm waving, with incense that really stinks and hand clapping and plenty of yelling. But each time, just as Des and the particular lady of his choice reach the ultimate moment, whap, the ghost is there. Naturally, all the stinking incense and exploding powders and yelling and hand clapping don't exactly delight the young thing who happens to be sharing the sheets with Des, and she always demands to know just what the hell is going on with this creepy guy hopping nervously around their bed. But Des is able to calm her down, and she's usually okay until the ghost shows, at which point she bolts, like they all bolt, straight out of the room shrieking. This goes on for 3 weeks, with Des getting thinner and more bereft looking by the week. Finally, I ask him if he'd mind if I join the group, to kind of size up the ghost for myself and maybe come in with some fresh ideas. Sure, he says, and that night there's Des and the uneasy ghostbreaker and a redhead with an immense heaving bosom and me, all of us in the master bedroom. Sex, under these conditions, is never good. But Des manages to thrash himself into a damn remarkable performance until... Zambo. There's the ghost, right on the old button. I give him the careful once-over. A seedy old gink, scowling inside a cheapy suit of backlot armor, with a crazy-eyed palomino above his head. I concentrate on the face. Suddenly, I let out a whoop. I know the bum! That's Joey Gibbler! It's Gibbler, I tell you. The ghost looks startled and vanishes. But by then the girl is shrieking and the nervous ghostbreaker's exploding more powder, and Des is in no real condition to listen to me. After, when things are more settled, I spell it out. Gibbler was an extra back in the days of the silence, I tell Des. I remember reading about how he and this palomino horse both broke their necks doing a battle scene for the Queen's Cute Question, one of those slapstick historicals they used to grind out at Monarch. Des shoots up an eyebrow. Dad directed that one. I know he did. It was his last picture. Exactly. And he died of a stroke the following week, which explains everything. Not to me, it doesn't. Joey was sore over getting his neck broke, and he blamed your pop for it. But he didn't have time to haunt him. The stroke beat him out. So Gibbler decides to haunt you instead. He waits until you're old enough to taste the sweet fruits of life, and then he cunningly denies them to you. And he'll keep on until we placate him. But how? How do you placate a sore spook? The key is Joey Gibbler Jr. The kid must be about 30 by now. Not bad looking. I've seen his name in the trades. An extra trying to make it as an actor? Right. So set it up for him. Throw around some weight at the studio and get him into a picture. Junior clicks, and his old man stops haunting you out of sheer gratitude. You can do it. Albert, he says, I can do it. He does it. Joey winds up with a fat part in the big bottom, and overnight, the way it can happen, Joey Gibbler Jr. is a star. And overnight, Des makes it all the way through the moment of truth. No ghost. Old Des Cahill is de-virginized. He hugs me, dances me around the room, thrusts signed checks at me, insists that I accept his mother's wedding ring. It is a tearful, joyous occasion. The next night I get a jingle at my place. Des on the horn, sounding terribly bereft. What's wrong, I ask. A new one showed, he says. Another ghost? Albert, it can't be, but it is. It's Joey Jr. I buzz over to Benedict Canyon in my Porsche. Des meets me at the door, crazy-eyed like the Palomino. We get it all in the 11 o'clock news. Actor dies in freak set accident. Rising star Joey Gibbler Jr. suffers a broken neck when a delicatessen set falls on him during a Jewish film sequence. Wow. Des signs. That accounts for the white butcher's apron he's wearing and what he holds above his head, which is a display case full of mostly bagels and cream cheese. I'm sorry to tell you, but this story has no happy ending. Des, who swears he'll never resign himself to celibacy, has quit the acting game and is on the move. Last I heard, he covered most of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, and was in the Australian backcountry. What he's looking for is a very brave chick, well stacked, 18 to 25, who isn't afraid of seeing each night a scowling spook in a butcher's apron with a display case full of mostly bagels and cream cheese above his head. And they just don't hardly make that kind anymore. Victoria by Ogden Nash. Victoria was an attractive new girl at the Mrs. Mallison's female seminary. Such an attractive new girl indeed. It is a pity she never grew to be an old girl. Perhaps she would have if the Mrs. Mallison had established her seminary a little closer to Newburyport, or at least a little further from Salem. Victoria was good enough at games, and not too good at lessons. Her mouth was wide enough to console the homely girls, and her eyes bright enough to include her among the pretty ones. She could weep over the death of a horse in a story, and remain composed at the death of an aunt in the hospital. She would rather eat between meals than at them. She wrote to her parents once a week if in need of anything, and she truly meant to do the right thing. Only so often the wrong thing was easier. In short, Victoria was an ideal candidate for the 3Ds. The night-blooming sorority, which, like, had the Ceres, flourished after dark for many years, unscented by the precise noses of the Mrs. Mallison. So felt the 3Ds, so felt Victoria, and the only obstacle to her admission lay in the very title of the club itself, which members knew signified that none could gain entrance without the accomplishment of a feat, daring, deadly, and done never before. Victoria was competent at daring feats, unsurpassable at deadly feats, but where was she to discover a feat never done before? Of the present membership, Amanda had leaped into a cold bath with her clothes on. Miranda had climbed the roof in her nightgown to drop a garter snake down the Mrs. Mallison's chimney. Amelia had eaten cold spaghetti blindfolded, thinking they were worms, and Cordelia had eaten worms blindfolded, thinking they were cold spaghetti. What was left for Victoria? It was Amanda who, at a meeting of the steering committee, wiped the fudge from her fingers on the inside of her dressing gown and spoke the name of Eliza Catspaw. Who was she? Asked Miranda, pouring honey on a slice of coconut cake. A witch, said Amanda. She was burned, said Amelia. Hanged, said Cordelia. And she couldn't get into the churchyard, so they buried her in the meadow behind the old slaughterhouse, said Amanda. The gravestone is still there, said Amelia. Oh, bother. The cake's all gone. Never mind. I'll eat caramels. There's writing on it, too, said Cordelia, who was not hungry. But you can't read it in the daytime, only by moonlight. I'd forgotten how good currant jelly is on marshmallows, said Amanda. The 3Ds must tell Victoria about Eliza Catspaw. Late next evening, Victoria took her pen in hand. Dear Father and Mother, she wrote, I hope you are well. I am doing well in algebra, but Miss Hattie is unfair about my French irregular verbs. I am doing well in grammar, but Miss Meddy has chosen me to pick on. Dear Father, everybody else's father sends them $1 every week. I have lots of things to write, but the bell is ringing for supper. Lots of love, your loving daughter, Victoria. Victoria knew that in 10 minutes, Miss Hattie Mallison would open the door slightly, peer at the bed, murmur, Good night, Victoria, sweet dreams, and disappear. It took Victoria 7 minutes to construct a dummy out of a mop, a nightgown, and several pillows and blankets. As she lowered herself to the ground, she heard the door open, heard Miss Hattie's murmur, heard the door close. The soaring moon ran through Victoria as she marched, as she skipped, as she pranced towards the old slaughterhouse. She had for company her high moon spirits and her long shadow, the shadow which was a Victoria that no Miss Malison could ever cage. No girl has ever had a taller, livelier companion than my shadow, thought Victoria, and she breathed deeply and spread her arms, and her shadow breathed with her and spread crooked arms up the walls and across the roof of the slaughterhouse. The moon grew brighter with each burr that Victoria struggled against on her way across the meadows that had been abandoned to burrs, the meadow where no beast fed, the meadow where Victoria's shadow strengthened at each proud and adventurous step. Where the burrs grew thickest, where her loyalty to the 3Ds wore the thinnest, she came upon the gravestone. How hard the moon shone, as Victoria leaned against the crooked slab, perhaps to catch her breath, perhaps to stand on one foot and pluck the burrs off. When the stone quivered and rocked behind her, and the ground trembled beneath her feet, she bravely remembered her purpose, that at midnight, in the moonlight, she was to prove herself a worthy companion of Amanda, and Miranda, Amelia, and Cordelia. Unwillingly she turned, and wilfully she read the lines which the rays of the moon lifted from the stone so obscured by rain and moss. Here waits Eliza Catspaw. Who touches this stone on moonlight meadow shall live no longer than his shadow. The job of memorizing was done, the imitation into the 3Ds handsomely undergone. Gracious, is that all there is to it? Thought Victoria, and set out for the seminary. It was natural that she should hurry, so perhaps it was natural that she did not miss the exuberant shadow which should have escorted her home. The moon was bright behind Victoria. Who couldn't tell how she forgot that there should have been a shadow to lead the way? But there was no shadow. Her shadow had dwindled as she ran, as though Victoria grew shorter, or perhaps the moon grew more remote. And if she did not miss her shadow, neither did she hear or see whatever it may have been that rustled and scuttled past her and ahead of her. I hope my dear little dummy is still there, thought Victoria, as she climbed through the window. I hope Miss Hattie hasn't been unfair and shaken me. She tiptoed across the room in the dark to the bed and bent to remove the dummy. But as she reached down, the dummy, which was no longer a dummy, reached up its dusty fingers first. Ghost of Buckstown Inn by Arnold M. Anderson. Several travel-worn drummers sat in the lobby exchanging yarns. It was Rodney Green's turn, and he looked wise and began his tale. I don't claim by any means that the belief in ghosts is a general thing in Arkansas, but I do say that I had an experience out there a few years ago. It was late in the fall, and I happened to be in the village of Buckstown, which desecrates a very limited portion of the state. The town is about as small and dirty a place as ever I saw, and the Buckstown Inn is not much above the general character of the place. The region is inhabited by natives who still cling to all sorts of foolish superstitions. The inn, in the antebellum days, was kept by one who was said to be the meanest and most crabbed of mortals. The old demon was as miserly as he was mean, and all his narrow life he hoarded his filthy lucre with fiendish greed. Report had it also that he had even murdered his patrons in their beds for their money. What the facts actually were, I don't know. Even to this day, the old inn is held in suspicion. A lingering effect of former horrors still clouds its memory. The present proprietor, Bunk Watson, his real name is Bunker, I believe, is an altogether different sort of chap. A southern type, in fact. One of those shiftless, heedless, happy-go-lucky mortals who loves strong whiskey and who chews an enormous quid of black tobacco and smokes a corn-cob pipe at the same time. When the former keeper shuffled off, his property fell to a distant relative, the present keeper, who with his family immediately moved in from a neighboring hamlet and took possession. It was well known that the old proprietor had accumulated considerable wealth during his sojourn among the living, but all efforts to discover any treasure upon the premises had failed, and now the idea of ever finding it was practically given up. As far as Bunk was concerned, the matter troubled him little. He had a hard-working wife who ran things the best she could under the circumstances, and saw that his meals were forthcoming at their respective intervals. What more could he wish? Why should he care if there was a treasure buried upon his place? Indeed, it would have been a sore puzzle for him to know what to do with a fortune, unless perhaps his wife came to his aid. Among the stories that hovered in the history of the Buckstown Inn was one which involved a ghost. In the room where the former keeper had died, peculiar noises were heard at unearthly hours, sighing, moaning, and in fact all the other indications which point to the existence of ghosts were said to be present. On account of this, the chamber had long since been abandoned. I listened with keen interest to the wonderful tales about the haunted room, and then suddenly resolved to investigate, to sleep in that chamber that very night, and see for myself all that was to be seen. I told Buck of my purpose. He shook his head, shrugged his shoulders, but instead of warning me and offering a flood of protest, as I expected, he merely took his pipe from his mouth, let fly a quart or so yellowish juice from between a pair of brown-stained lips, and opening one corner of his wide mouth lazily called out, "Jane!" His wife appeared, and he intimated that I should settle the matter with the old woman. The prospect of a fee persuaded the wife, and off she went to arrange for my bed in that ill-fated room. At 9 o'clock that evening, I bid the family good night, took my candle, ascended the rickety stairs, and entered the Chamber of Horrors. The atmosphere was heavy, and had a peculiar odor that was not at all pleasing. However, I latched the door, and was soon in bed. Having propped myself up with pillows, I was prepared to wait the coming of the ghost. Overhead, the dusty rafters, which once had experienced the sensation of being whitewashed, but which were now a dirty yellowish color, were hung with a fantastic array of cobwebs. The flickering light of the candle reflected upon the walls, and against the ceiling, a pyramid of grotesque shapes, and with this effect being continually disturbed by the swaying cobwebs, the whole caused the room to appear rather ghostly after all, and especially so to an imaginative mind. I waited and waited for hours. It seemed but still no ghost. Perhaps it was afraid of my candlelight, so I blew it out. No sooner had I done this and settled back in bed again than a white hand appeared through the door, then a whole figure. At last the ghost had come. A white and sheeted ghost. It had come right through the door, although it was locked, and now it advanced toward the bed. Raising its long white arm, it pointed a bony finger at me, and then commanded, "Come with me." Thereupon it turned to the door, while instantly I jumped out of bed to follow. Some unseen power compelled me to obey. The door flew open, and the ghost led me down the stairs, through long halls into the cellar, through mysterious underground corridors, upstairs again, in and out of rooms which I never dreamed were to be found in that old rambling inn. Finally, through a small door in the rear, we left the house. I was in my sleeping garments, but no matter, I had to follow. The white form, with a slow and measured tread, and as silent as death, led the way into the orchard. There, under a tree at the further end, it pointed to the ground, and in the same ghostly tones before, said, "Here you will find a great treasure buried." The ghost then disappeared, and I saw it no more. I stood dazed and trembling. Upon recovering my wits, I started to dig, but the chill of the night air and the scantiness of my night robes made such labor impractical. So I decided to leave some mark to identify the place and come around again at daybreak. I reached up and broke off a limb. Overcome with my night's exertions, I slept the next morning until a loud rapping on my door and a croaking voice warned me that it was noon. I had intended to leave Buckstown Inn that day, but prompted by curiosity and anxious to investigate, I unpacked my gripsack for a comfortable stay. You must understand that this was my first experience with a ghost, and I feared I might never see another. At breakfast, my landlady waited on me in silence, though once I detected her eyes following me with a peculiar expression. She wanted to ask me how I enjoyed the night, but I would not gratify her by volunteering a word. My host was more outspoken. "Reckon you didn't get much sleep," said he with a queer smile. "Did you hear anything?" I asked. "Well, I did. Yes, he said with a drawl, but you didn't disturb me any. I knew you'd have trouble when you went in that room to sleep. That afternoon I slipped out to the tree, but to my amazement I found that the twig I had broken from the branches was gone. Finally I found under the lower trunk of an apple tree an open place from which a small branch had evidently been wrested. But on looking further I discovered that every apple tree in the orchard had been similarly disfigured. More mysterious than ever, I said, but tonight shall decide. That night I pleaded weariness, which no one seemed inclined to question, and sought my couch earlier. Going to try it again? Asked my host. Yes, and I'll stay all winter, but I'll get even with that ghost, I said. That night I kept the candle burning until midnight when I blew it out. Instantly the room was flooded with a soft light, and at the foot of the bed stood my ghost, the identical ghost of last night. Again the bony finger beckoned, and a sepulchral voice whispered, "Follow me." I sprang from the bed, but the figure darted ahead of me. It flew through the doorway and down the stairs, and I after it. At the foot of the staircase, an unseen hand reached forward and caught my foot, and I fell sprawling headlong. But in a second I was on my feet and pursuing the ghost. It had gained on me a few yards, but I was quicker, and just as we reached the outside door I nearly touched its robes. They sent a chill through my frame, and I nearly gave up the pursuit. As it passed through the doorway, it turned and gave me one look, and I caught the same malignant light in its eyes that I remembered from the night before. In the open orchard, I felt sure I could catch it, but my ghost had no intention of allowing me any such opportunity. To my disgust, it darted backward and into the house, slamming the door in my face. In my frenzy of fear and chagrin, I threw myself against the oaken door with such force that its rusty old hinges yielded, and I landed in the big front room of the inn, just in time to see the white skirts of the ghost flit up the stairs. Upstairs, I flew after it, and into an old chamber. There, huddled in a corner, I saw it. In a minute's delay, it had secured a lighted candle, and as I entered it, it advanced to daunt me with bony arm upraised to great height. "Caught!" I cried, throwing my arms around the figure, and I had made the acquaintance of a real-life ghost. The white robes fell, and I saw revealed my hostess of BUckstown Inn. Next morning, when I threatened to call the police, she confessed to me that she masqueraded as a ghost to draw visitors to the out-of-the-way old place, and that she found its tale of being haunted highly profitable to her. We Are the Dead by Henry Kuttner. Senator Kennicott was grateful for the cool night wind on his flushed face. He wished Hobson, walking slowly at his side, would stop his interminable argument about the bill. The man's high-pitched, rather unpleasant voice seemed out of place, incongruous in the peaceful hush of Arlington Cemetery. Hobson was panting a little, his fleshy, well-massaged face creased in annoyance. The walk through the cemetery had been no hardship to the slim, whipcord body of the senator, but Hobson was not used to walking. Kennicott had felt that a stroll homeward from the banquet would calm his turbulent thoughts, excited by the innumerable activities of Memorial Day, and Hobson, anxious to settle the matter of the bill, had rather unwillingly decided to accompany him. "It may bring us closer to war," the senator said, breaking in sharply on Hobson's involved explanation. "Not at all. It's merely preparedness." Hobson's sharp little eyes searched the other's face. "We must protect American interest in foreign countries, surely. But this is very aggressive," Kennicott objected. "After all, we don't want the hatred of other countries." "Oh, come now. That's going it at it a bit strong. I've already explained how." "But war," the senator said, looking absently at a tombstone in the distance. "There'll be no war," Hobson insisted somewhat shrilly. "If I thought this bill were really dangerous, I'd be the first to demand its withdrawal." "How much do you stand to make out of it?" the senator asked abruptly. "Well, never mind. That's scarcely a fair question. Can't we let this go till tomorrow, Hobson? I'm so utterly tired." Hobson stared at him for a moment. Then, choosing his words with care, he said, "The bill really should go through, Senator. I think it will. Assure you of securing the nomination next year." Kennicott looked at him keenly, little lines bracketing his mouth. Hobson's support was valuable, in fact, indispensable, If he were to withdraw it? Glancing sideways at his companion, the senator almost walked into a shadowy, slim figure that stood quietly in the darkness beneath a tall elm. A drawn white face was turned to Kennicott, and he felt a sudden sense of shock at the agony in the dark, brooding eyes. It was a young man, almost a boy, with deep lines of pain etched in his face. "I'm sorry," the senator said, quickly glancing at the boy's faded, worn khaki uniform. "I didn't see you." The boy made no answer, and the senator made a tentative movement to pass on. Abruptly, the youthful, haggard face was turned away, and the boy said in a muffled tone, "I can't sleep." "What?" Kennicott stared. "I say I can't sleep," the boy repeated, his voice dull with pain. Hobson made a clucking sound of commiseration and glanced at the senator. Kennicott felt a surge of sympathy. The obvious youthfulness of the boy was so incongruous with his taut face, the white, tortured line of his lips. "I know," Kennicott said. "It can be terrible. I had insomnia for almost a week once." "A week?" The other said scornfully. "That's nothing. It's been ages." Kennicott was scribbling something on the back of an envelope. "Be with you in a minute," he said under his breath to Hobson, who was chafing at the delay. "Here, any druggist can fill this," he said, giving the paper to the boy. "It will fix you up if anything can. I know how you feel," he ended sympathetically. The youth took it skeptically and thrust it into a pocket. "Thanks just the same," he said oddly. "It's always like this on Memorial Day. It's worse then, you know." Hobson moved impatiently, his eyes flickering uneasily over the boy's form. "Oh," the senator said understandingly, "I see, but look, here, aren't you rather young too?" "Am I?" the youth asked. "I'm not so young as I look. I was in the war all right." Hobson gave a grunt of disbelief. Even the senator felt that the boy was lying. True, his face was worn, haggard, but he couldn't be over 25 at most. Probably he didn't mean the World War. There were always battles going on. Manchuria, South America, Africa. "Well, you get those powders," the senator said after an awkward pause. "I'm sure they'll do the trick." He cleared his throat. "Can you use—" He drew out his wallet rather hesitantly, but the boy was not offended. "No thanks," he said, a boyish grin suddenly appearing on his face. Then it was gone, replaced by that strained expression of pain. He suddenly seemed to notice a low gray tombstone nearby, and took a few steps toward it. "Poor fool," he murmured very softly. The senator looked quickly away. It was a shock to hear Hobson's high-pitched, rasping voice. Had the man no intelligence, no decency? Kennicott put up a restraining hand, but it was too late. "Oh, come, come," Hobson was saying. "Don't say a thing like that, son. It isn't right." "Come on," Kennicott urged under his breath, but the boy interrupted him. "Why not?" he asked, a sharp note in his tired young voice. Wasn't he a fool? Hobson would try to argue with the boy, the senator thought hopelessly. Couldn't he see that? "You're too young. You don't understand what he died for, what his comrades died for," Hobson said, his plump face very earnest. "Does it matter?" the boy asked very quietly. "They died." "They died for something very real," Hobson plowed on. "If they could—" "For God's sake, come on," Kennicott snapped, grasping Hobson's arm. "Leave him alone. Can't you see?" "All right," the boy said suddenly. "Maybe you're right. But let me tell you a little story." He came closer, his eyes dark and tortured. "About a fellow who went over to France in '17. Just an ordinary fellow, I guess, who was scared stiff when the shells started bursting around, and the machine guns were making their racket in the dark. But he was like the rest of the fellows. He didn't dare show how much he was afraid. A sniper got him in '18. The senator was uncomfortable and showed it, but to his disgust he saw that Hobson was preparing to answer the boy. "Wait, let me finish. A sniper got him," I said, "and that was fine. He didn't hear the bullets screaming over the trench or the groaning of dying men. All the horrors were gone, and he was resting, forgetting. The darkness was kind, and then one day he awoke." "What?" That was Hobson, frankly staring. "I say he woke up. Glory woke him up. Splendor and a stone monument that was very heavy. Bitter glory and squalid splendor." the boy went on fiercely. They tortured and shamed him. You see, he was awake now, and he wanted. God, how he wanted to forget. There were tears in the tortured eyes, and the boy brushed them away roughly with his sleeve. Then, catching his breath in a little gasp, he turned suddenly and began to walk quickly away. For a heartbeat, the senator stood silent, unmoving, staring at the slim khaki figure receding into the gloom. Wait, he called. Let him go, Hobson said, an angry undercurrent in his voice. You can't. But Kennicott was remembering that white drawn face, those brooding eyes from which all the youthfulness had been drained. No, I've got to, he said in an inarticulate aside to Hobson, and took a few hasty steps forward. He saw the pale blur that was the boy's face turn toward him briefly, and the slender figure increased its pace. Ignoring Hobson's remonstrances, the senator began to hurry after the boy. Kennicott had to exert himself to overtake his quarry, and was glad that his muscles were still firm and elastic. He saw the boy turn hastily down a side path and broke into a run. For 100 feet or so the path was very dark, and then it broadened out into a large clearing. At its edge Kennicott swept a searching glance around and jerked abruptly to a halt. His jaw dropped. A moment later Hobson pounded up, wheezing a little. He paused, scrutinizing Kennicott's face. What's the matter? He asked quickly. The senator did not answer, and Hobson repeated his question. Then Kennicott turned a startled, almost frightened face to his companion. Did, did you see that? He asked unsteadily. What? Hobson glanced around. The boy, he's gone. Yes, he's gone, Hobson. I saw. He brushed a hand across his eyes. Hobson, can a man vanish? What? Hobson stared, his mouth open. A man? But I saw it, the senator said earnestly, as though pleading for belief. That boy wasn't... He pointed toward a great white block in the center of the clearing. It was right there. I saw. He could not finish. What are you talking about? Hobson's voice was purposely crisp and peremptory. You're all unnerved. Come on, the boy's gone. We can't stay here. You go on, Kennicott said suddenly. I'm going to stay here for a while. Hobson hesitated. Then, making up his mind, he drew a paper from his pocket, held it out. Here's the bill, then. I'll phone you tomorrow. Kennicott made no move. He said dully, The bill. No, I can't. Look here, Hobson said furiously. You're not going to act like a damn fool, are you? What the devil's the matter? The senator turned to him a face of white marble and said nothing. Hobson hesitated, and in his rage pushed aside his diplomacy, his caution. Because, by heaven, I can break you, he snarled. You're not president yet. I can ruin your career, and you know it. I know it, the senator said quietly, but that bill won't pass while I'm in the Senate. He turned his back on Hobson and stood silently gazing at the gaunt white mausoleum in the clearing. He had spoken patriotically and at length there not 6 hours before. It was the tomb of the unknown soldier.